Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar launch of the joint report between the International Longevity Centre UK and the Royal College of Design, the Royal College of Art Design Age Institute, which is titled Money Well Spent, Overcoming Barriers to Spending in Later Life. My name is Carly Dixon. I'm a Knowledge Exchange Fellow at the Design Age Institute, and I'm very happy to be moderating the panel discussion today that will follow the presentation of the report. So before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. That we'll be recording this webinar session, and we'll be posting that to our websites following the session, and you should get a link as well. And we'll be taking questions from the audience via the Q&A box at the bottom, so feel free to post your questions in there at any time during the session, and we will be keeping an eye on that and ask those questions towards the end of the session. And the question that we're discussing today is how we want to spend our time and our money in later life. This is a question that we at Design Age Institute have been keen to better understand. So our mission is to use design to help people have healthier and happier later lives. And that's why it's critical for us to understand the barriers that people face that stop them from spending their time and their money how they would like to. We've been really fortunate to collaborate with ILC on this topic, who have been studying the impact of longevity on society since they were established in 1997. And to quote from the report, the aim is not to promote consumption for the sake of it, particularly in the context of growing environmental concerns, but rather we want to understand the barriers preventing older people from spending in the way they would like, especially on items and experiences that benefit their health. In this way, we can identify practical ways for designers and policymakers to address these barriers to ensure a growing consumer base isn't excluded from participating fully in the economy and in society. So with that in mind, I'm pleased to introduce the author of the report, Dr. Vivian Burrows. Vivian joined the ILC in December 2022 as a senior research fellow. Before this, she worked as an associate professor in economics at the University of Reading. Vivian has a PhD in economics from the University of York, which she completed in 2012. Vivian has a particular interest in household financial decision-making and financial well-being, and how wealth transfers between family members affect the accumulation of wealth and wealth inequalities. She's also interested in the causes behind the differences in retirement income between men and women, and how this gender pension gap has evolved over time. Her recent work includes a book chapter on families, housing, and economic security, and a participatory research project exploring the impact of young onset dementia on financial well-being. Vivian has also been working on a textbook on the economics of the public sector for Oxford University Press, which includes dedicated chapters on healthcare, aging, and pensions. So Vivian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Carly, and thank you everyone, or to everyone who's listening in on the webinar today. So I will just pull up the slides for the presentation. Okay. So yes, as Carly said, the focus of this project is on understanding the barriers to spending in later life. So we know that spending tends to fall as we age. And what we wanted to do with this project was to try and understand why that happens and what some of the key barriers that that people face are, and that prevent them from spending their time and money in the way that they'd like to. Now, the project itself is the outcome of, so we ran a nationally representative survey of about 1,000 adults aged 60 and over in the UK. And we also carried out some more in-depth interviews with a smaller sample of individuals. And it's on these sort of two bits of evidence that the report is based. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is just sort of highlight some of the key findings from our report. Now, we found that there are significant barriers to spending in later life. So 72% of people that we surveyed felt that they were not spending their time and money in the way that they would like to. And in general, they seem to favour, or spending on experiences, whether it was time or money, seemed to be more important than spending on goods. So some of the top things that people identified when asked about the sorts of things that they'd like to do more of or spend more money on, Top things included holidays, things like going out for food or coffee, visiting friends and family, and participating in recreation and leisure activities. And it was in these areas that sort of the barriers to spending seemed to be more prevalent as well, although we also found significant barriers preventing people from sort of spending on the goods and products that they would like to as well. So the key question is, well, what are some of these barriers? And the quotes here from some of our interview participants illustrate some of the key issues. So financial barriers or financial concerns came out quite a lot. So whether this was about being on a tight budget, not having enough money, but also being worried about needing to save money to pay for potential future healthcare or care costs were important. But our interviews also highlighted other barriers, in particular barriers related to people's social networks. So the lack of, or not having enough people to do things with, was also a significant barrier preventing people from spending their time and money in the way that they'd like to. So in our survey, we designed a survey building on the insights we got from these interviews, and we identified three main categories of barriers. The first is about making money last. And in our survey, we found that by far the most important barrier to spending in later life had to do with financial concerns. And this was not only about being on a tight budget or not having enough money today, which is probably unsurprising given the current cost of living crisis, but 1 in 3 people were also worried about needing the money in the future. So this uncertainty over how much money they would need in the future and how much money they would have in the future was acting as a significant barrier to spending today. So some of the sort of future spending concerns here revolved around potential future care and healthcare costs, but also the potential need to spend on housing adaptations to sort of make their homes more suitable, more accommodating for themselves as they, or for us as we grow older. Another set of barriers had to do with access and accessibility. So just over half of our survey respondents felt that they had difficulty getting to and around places, and this acted as a barrier to their to spending. And some of the key some of the key issues identified here had to do with transport. So whether this was the lack of parking or expensive parking, issues around public transport, so the cost of public transport, the unreliability of public transport, but also in some cases the lack of viable public transport options. There were also access barriers related to the facilities available, in particular the lack of public toilets, and the lack of places to sit and have a rest on our high streets. And then some barriers to do with, I guess, the sort of accessibility of town centres, so how cluttered or uneven pavement surfaces can be, and so on. And lastly, we looked at barriers relating to the shopping experience itself, both offline and online. And here we found that 59% of the people we surveyed were dissatisfied with some aspect of the shop's products and hospitality settings on offer. And some of the sort of the key issues identified here had to do with self-service checkouts, or the dislike of self-service checkouts was quite a big one. But there were also issues around the facilities in shops, so the lack of toilets or lack of accessible toilets within shops, or difficulty finding toilets, lack of places to sit and rest, how noisy and busy some shopping environments are could also act as a deterrent to some of the individuals we surveyed. We also looked at experiences and barriers faced in online shopping. And here I think it's quite interesting because even though we carried out this survey online, we found that 50% of the people surveyed still didn't feel they shopped online as much as they would like to. And part of this had to do with, I guess, the way that online shopping works, the way it's quite, or feels quite impersonal, the lack of human interaction. But part of it was also related to concerns about online scams and fraud, issues around the quality of products. So when you're buying things online, it's harder to get a clear sense of what the products you're buying are like and whether the description is accurate. And also issues around the hassle of returning items. So these were the main barriers that we looked at. And the key question then is, well, what can we do about them? Now, to address barriers, to address some of the financial barriers, I think the key is really to work more in supporting financial security in later life. And this includes ensuring that everyone has access to affordable and accessible expert financial advice in later life to help them plan and manage their finances as they grow older. But there's also scope to invest in or to design in new financial products. So one of the key issues that came out from the survey was this worry about running out of money as we grow older. And this is why we tend to save rather than spend, or one of the reasons why we tend to save rather than spend. And it's perhaps unsurprising given that, you know, most of us, we don't know how long we're going to live for. We don't always know exactly what our future income is going to be. We don't know what our future expenditure needs are going to be. And all of this uncertainty makes planning very difficult. And this is where well-designed financial products have an important role to play. Now, we do have products like annuities, which provide a guaranteed income stream in retirement. These have fallen out of favour somewhat, and while they might be suitable for some individuals, they might not be appropriate for everyone. So it's important that the financial services industry thinks about what sort of products could we be developing to better support individuals' consumption during retirement and help with this financial planning. And related to this, there's also the issue of the our expected future expenditure, so the uncertainty we face on whether it's care or healthcare costs. And this is where we feel that the government could sort of take a more active steps to provide more certainty on future care costs to help people's financial planning in later life. And of course, financial security in later life is also about where we live, our homes. And this is where design cost awareness has a very important role to play. So making sure or ensuring that we're raising awareness among individuals of the age-inclusive design features in our homes that will help ensure that our homes are sort of suitable for us, are the right place for us for over the course of our lifetime. And of course, making or raising awareness of the associated costs of these features as well. In terms of access and accessibility, here investing in age-friendly communities would really help reduce some of these barriers. So for example, by designing and investing in safe, accessible, reliable and affordable public transport, or by designing better last mile travel. So we have made some progress in this area, but I think there's still a long way to go in terms of tackling this last mile hurdle. So how do we support people in getting from the car park or bus stop or underground station to their final destination, whether this is their place of work, the shops, a museum, or wherever it is they want to go. And this is one of the sort of, I think, key challenges in public transport at the moment. And the growth of recent sort of e-scooter and bike sharing schemes have helped address this to some extent. But it's important to remember that, well, these schemes, they're not available in all cities, and also they're not accessible to everyone. So it's really important that planners, when they're sort of designing the sort of public transport networks, or sort of helping or designing the services to help people navigate town centres, that they think about providing accessible micromobility options as well. So these could be things like trikes, for example, or mobility scooters. Another, I think, important issue here is to think about better integrating the different transport options available. So a better integration between public transport and these last mile travel options, embedding mobility as a service. So at the moment, if we want to plan a journey, we often have to rely on multiple platforms to look for train times, bus times, book tickets here, I don't know, maybe sign up to an app to be able to sort of hire a bike somewhere else. And this sort of makes the process of planning our travel a lot harder. So mobility as a service, or the goal of mobility as a service, is to provide a single platform, so a one-stop shop where people can basically plan their door-to-door journey and often buy all the tickets that they would need for that journey. And lastly, under access and accessibility, we feel that we should be actively promoting the UK's network of age-friendly communities. And the goal here is really to get councils and retailers and local groups to work together to reduce some of the physical and social barriers that individuals in their neighbourhoods, towns and cities face. And finally, to enhance the shopping experience, I think designing a more inclusive experience, both off and online, would be extremely important. And this includes, for example, recognizing and rewarding accessible design. For example, by introducing a nationally recognized accessibility accreditation program that would encourage retailers to go above and beyond the minimum legal requirements when it comes to accessibility. And also to provide a platform for rewarding and celebrating good accessible design practice. So along the lines of the Blue Badge Awards that exist in the hospitality sector. We could also be thinking about making more use of augmented reality to enhance the in-store shopping experience. And this could include things like creating apps so that people can use their smartphones or other handheld devices when they're walking around shops to scan products, to get more information about a particular product, or to find complementary products, or find information on more affordable alternatives, for example. And these systems could help make the in-store shopping experience more enjoyable, more accessible, but it's important that these systems, of course, are designed in an inclusive and accessible way. And lastly, we feel that we could do more to explore emerging technologies to enhance the online shopping experience. So making use of, say, virtual reality or metaverse technologies, for example, to create a truly immersive online shopping experience. And this could provide a platform for people who face significant barriers in getting to and around the shops. This will provide a platform for them to continue to benefit from, or to enjoy some of the benefits of shopping, and not just in terms of, you know, your online experience when you're browsing for products, and making that more, I guess, sort of more realistic, more in line with our experience when we wander around shops. But there's also the potential to make this a social experience as well. So provide an opportunity for people in different parts of the country, or even in different countries, to come together in an online shop as they would in a sort of face-to-face environment. So this is sort of quick overview of the report. It's been launched today, and it's available on the ILC website. So if you'd like to find out more information about any of our findings, then that's the place to go. So thank you very much for listening, and yeah, I look forward to the panel discussion next. And I will stop sharing my screen.
That's great. Thank you so much, Vivi. It was so interesting and gives us so much to dig into for our panel discussion now. So what I'd like to do is have our panelists join us here, and if you could please introduce yourselves to start, that would be great. We'll start with Chris, and then Colin and David.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris. I'm a senior research fellow at the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design, and I lead research in the Age and Diversity research space and for the Design Age Institute.
Hi, my name's Colin Lowe. I'm director of the Design Age Institute here at the Royal College of Art in London.
And I'm David Sinclair, the Chief Executive of the International Longevity Centre in the UK, the specialist think tank on the impact of longevity on society.
Thanks all. So I'll start off with a few questions for you to set the scene for us. So I think, David, I'll start by asking you, at ILC, you've been doing research on spending and saving in later life for quite some time now. And I wondered if you could share your perspective on why this retirement consumption puzzle is such an important issue to address.
I think on the one hand, there is this sort of perception in public policy and in the media that older people are spending the kids' inheritance, and you see these newspaper stories, and I think we really want to get to the bottom of how true that is. Why have we done the work? Actually, but fundamentally because it's really important for our economy and important for younger people as well as old. And at the simplest level, if most of our wealth is being held by older people and it isn't being used productively, we don't create demand in the economy, so we don't create jobs for all ages. So I think there's an economic argument. And I think secondly, and perhaps we'll come back onto this later, how we use our money and our resources is really, really important to our well-being, and we've got to make sure that we maximize that.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
I love that idea of people can be criticized for spending their kids' inheritance as if it is their money. You work all your life and you pay your taxes and you save a bit of money for your retirement. And then there's this expectation you don't spend it in your retirement, you hoard it to give to your kids. It's great when you can do that, but surely you earned the money, you get to spend it on your health and well-being in your later years. That should be the number one kind of rule.
And Colin, I think I'll follow up with you on another question to tie in design role in this equation. And I think we've discussed how sometimes design's role in overcoming the barriers isn't that well understood societally. And why do you think then it's so important to help clarify how design does play a role in either creating the barrier or overcoming the barrier to these health benefiting experiences and goods and items that we would want?
Well, I think, the design industry for the last 20, 30 years have been doing a very good job in trying to communicate what design is and where its benefits lie. But I don't think it is still very well understood that, we take a very sort of universal view of design, and that everything made by people has been designed by people. In other words, there was a problem that somebody thought up and they imagined a solution in their head and they built the solution and they used it, tested it. Therefore, everything that we've got has gone through some sort of design process. It's just most things in reality aren't very well designed. And it's more true now than it's ever been because of the complexity of life. It used to be I designed a pair of shoes, I made a pair of shoes, I opened a shoe shop and people from the village would come and buy my shoes. And now it's not good enough to design the shoe and put it on the shelf. You've got to design a way of getting people to the shelf to buy the shoe, because it's not easy anymore. And that whole journey hasn't been designed, just the shoe, or at least a lot of it's been thought, because there's so many different parties involved in solving that problem. And it also, when I was at college or just after graduating, design went through a very bad sort of brand reputation where everybody kind of said, it looks good, but it doesn't work. Like a designer watch or a designer car or a designer suit, it looked good, but it didn't work very well. And in this demographic, we find it's the other way around. There's lots of things that work very well. They just don't look good. Nobody wants them. And I think we've forgotten that aspect of desirability again. That if you want people to adopt things, to use things, to do things, then they've got to be designed so they're desirable, so that people actually want to do the thing that you want them to do. Otherwise, adoption is always going to be impacted. And I think that's at kind of the heart of one of the things that we talk about. We talk about desirability, we talk about happiness, we talk about joy being a key motivator in the design process.
And can I just come in with a very specific example? There's been a lot of stuff in the media over the last few weeks around the months, really, around the perception that older people are being excluded by the move away from cash in car parks towards apps and things like that. And there was a really interesting point made by Ashton Applewaite in our Greengross lecture last week that was, frankly, when you go towards younger people and talk about some of these things, they'll say this app is stupid, it doesn't work. Whereas when you sometimes say to older people, they'll say, well, I can't manage that app, it's really too complicated, it's me that's the problem. And the reality is the first is true, that actually there is nothing intuitively wrong wrong with getting rid of cash. In fact, it makes complete sense in so many ways, but you've got to make sure you design the alternatives in the accessible and usable way. And the failure to do that is what causes the problem.
Yeah, 100%. My former boss from the MIT Age Lab, Joe Coughlin, used to say that the older age group are the only users, that we blame them for not being able to use the product rather than blaming the designer for not designing an intuitive.
Well, I'd agree, but I think that it is a very human action that if you can't do the thing you want to do, and I remember with the A to Z again when I was younger, trying to get around London with the old A to Z and trying to get it to work, and you used to blame yourself, think, oh, what an idiot, I can't seem to understand and we do tend to blame ourselves first. But I think this younger generation are so used to bad digital products that they've learned to blame the bad digital product rather than, and I think they're right to blame the bad digital product. And that move is, I think, is a really helpful move to point at the things in the system as, okay, the human is part of the system, but it's really that the massive other things as well that have been badly designed you need to point at.
I think as well, it's that idea of what you've grown up with, so the younger generation that have grown up with this are more likely to not reflect on it as something unusual, so the blame isn't based on it being new. They've grown up with this, so they blame it on bad design, as they should. It doesn't work the way it should. But I think if you come to something that's less familiar, there is a little less confidence around it and a little internalizing of where the blame sits, but it absolutely does sit on the design and the lack of understanding of the needs, that getting the design brief wrong because designers or whoever it may be have not brought in enough voices to understand the problem well enough.
But I think as Colin said as well, though, we have to make the products and services desirable. If you look at the Octopus card in Hong Kong, which is a payment card, really simple to use, everyone uses it, or WePay in China, which is basically, I was talking to someone about, so well, do older people use WePay and WeChat in China? And it's like, yeah, everyone uses it, and they use it because they like to talk to their grandchildren and they like to pay for things, and it's done in a really simple way. And I really think there's something about the making sure the experience is what people want, because frankly people don't want the extra hassle. But if you say, well, you can both pay with this and you can use to chat to your friends, then isn't that fantastic? And so I think we've got to really focus on what people actually might want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like inclusive design, I think, is about that access, certainly, but it's about elegance as well, elegance of experience. It works, it's pleasurable, it does what it should do, and you understand how it's making things better.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that might be a nice transition into a little report specific questions that I'll start with Vivi. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of the findings that you thought were particularly intuitive and that readers might be like, oh, that makes sense. And then others that may have surprised you or been maybe something that we wouldn't expect to see come out of the research.
Yes, of course. I think the fact that the number one barrier had to do with financial concerns, whether that's being on a tight budget or worries about needing the money in the future, was perhaps not that surprising, particularly given the sort of current cost of living crisis. But there were also some, I thought, quite interesting and maybe sort of counterintuitive findings. So in particular, we looked at the how the sort of the prevalence of some of the barriers varied across age groups, because the people we were looking at, so we looked at everyone aged 60 and above. Of course, within that, there's a lot of diversity. So we tried to break it down by age and some other characteristics. And it was interesting. So as you'd expect, people, when we think about sort of access and accessibility barriers, people who are older and people who reported worse health were more likely to have difficulty getting, or say they had difficulty getting to and around places. And that's probably not very surprising. What I found interesting was actually there were the numbers of younger respondents, so people in their early 60s and people who reported their health as good or excellent, also, like quite a significant number of these respondents also reported these difficulties. So that suggests to me that a lot of these access and accessibility barriers that we might think, okay, they make things difficult, they make things a lot harder for some people, but actually they make things difficult for everyone. And by addressing these barriers, we're not focusing on a particular group, we're sort of focusing on making things better for everyone. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's quite powerful. It can help us make the case for having more inclusive design.
I think for me, when I first came across this research and started reading into it in detail, it was this simple statement that, I've got enough stuff. You by the time you get to your 60s and 70s, you've kind of got one of everything. And I just hadn't thought about it like that, because I was still thinking in that kind of 30, 40-year-old mindset of a consumer, and this idea that, well, if you want to sell me a toaster, you've got to give me a very good reason to get rid of the perfectly functioning toaster I've got in my house at the minute. And if you want me to buy some clothes, you've got to think of a very good reason why I'm going to throw out these jeans that don't have holes in them. I've got enough stuff. So and I just thought that was very interesting. We're trying to keep selling people stuff that they've got is not a very good strategy for people in this demographic. You're not targeting on what their needs are. And I think the slide that you showed, Vivian, with you talk about holidays and experiences, people buying experiences, social inclusion, social interaction, joy, happiness, things that add quality to their life rather than objects. Is it those two things combined? I think is quite revelatory.
I think as well, that's really interesting, Colin. I think because I'm absolutely in that mindset myself. I have to be very well convinced if I buy something that I already have. So it's almost the opportunity there is if something changes. So we were talking about these kind of smart cards and Japan, China, Oyster cards and so on here. So recently my son got, he's 11, a little wallet that you can instantly ping the cards up, so you don't have to dig into the wallet. And my father saw it, and he's in his 70s, and he's like, that's brilliant. So it's the change away from money in this instance, the sort of change of the needs, the change of the experience. So he can easily press this button, the cards all display themselves, he takes it out easily. And he was inspired by an 11-year-old's consumerism. My 11-year-old doesn't really need it, but my father saw the good design, essentially, the well-considered design. How will people actually use this?
And David made the great point about banks and that change. You look at the Monzo card, which is, kind of meant to be targeted. It's a challenger bank targeted at kind of youthful, want to do things differently. You go down to the pub and you look at the people who get them out of their wallet to pay in the pub with them. And I don't see there's a lot of younger people using them, but there's a lot of everybody from every age group using them, simply because it is a much more intuitive, usable interface, much simpler to understand and get just the bits of information that you want when you want it. Now, it still really uses people's second bank, as opposed necessarily perhaps to their first bank, but it's made huge inroads, and it's not because it targeted the audience, it was just better designed.
And I think because the report looks at what are the design opportunities and also the policy recommendations, I was wondering, Chris, if you might want to share some thoughts on the areas where you felt that these designs that help us and with what we want and need, and then the policy recommendations that Vivi had been sharing, and if there's moments where you see there's particular alignment, or if there's ever moments where you think they're maybe at odds or needs more clarity about how they could better work together.
Lots of that within the report. I think policy making and designing is complex and messy, and often there are shared agendas, shared goals. But as Vivi was chatting, I was writing down, phrases and issues she was pointing out, like lack of places to rest, cluttered spaces, lack of toilet provision. And I think this whole topic around spending time and money, spending your resource in ways you want to, not being able to, it seems to be a lot of it is about getting out and about, navigating places well. And that seems to be a lot about age-friendly infrastructure, the housing, the buildings, the transportation systems. And I think policies are increasingly, highlighting this and talking to age friendliness. But I think, yeah, there is conflicts around, I guess, economic growth, where the priority is, the scale, the affordability. I think sometimes within cities, there's a tendency to try and attract younger cohorts. So they try, on one hand, there's a nudge towards age friendliness, but then the conflict is trying to bring in other cohorts where sometimes that age friendliness kind of falls off the radar a little. So there's that kind of tension and maybe a challenge around how you translate policy when all these other noises, all these other voices are coming in with the other priorities. Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking as Vivi was chatting.
Yeah, and David, I wonder, because ILC's been making policy recommendations for quite some time, if you had any thoughts on how we can get that best alignment between the policy recommendation and the design opportunity that can come in with it.
I think it's a real challenge, and I think clearly there is a I think we've absolutely made good progress in some areas. I think one of the real challenges, we have no government or industry leadership on how we adapt society for longer lives, and we're going to be running a business summit in September to just try and pull some people together. But I think on the sort of just come back on some of those other couple points. And I know you just made the point about not encouraging spending for spending's sake, and I think we have to keep that in the back of the front of mind, really. But I think it is true that if we create the right products, people will buy them. So how do we create the tom-tom effect? You have a new product, journalists are talking about on BBC Breakfast, everyone ultimately gets a sat nav in their car, or actually on their bike, or when they're walking now, as we lose the A to Z. We need to recognize that we may want that actually our needs may not change very much, but we might not want the long haul flight. And if we do, we might want to splash out on lounge access. We need to think. I think I'm much more positive, I think, than Colm is generally, much more glass half full around the progress that people like Design Age Institute and Helen Hamlin Centre have made on inclusive design. I think we've made massive steps forward in products, but actually we're miles away on services. So, for example, where's the inclusively designed nighttime economy? Anyone who stayed in a hotel knows that it's getting worse and worse. Working out not just how you make making sure that your bedroom has enough light, but working out how to switch them on is just a complete nightmare now. We've made what should be a really simple thing really complicated. It's still the case 40-50 years on that you turn a shower on by putting your hand under cold water. Design has completely failed us in so many ways. And I think a bit of it is making the economic case to business as well as to government. So, and there's a question in the chat I saw about return on investment. Just to get 5 immediately came to hand. Tesco's first website, they had a separate disability site. They realized that the separate disability site worked better than the other site, and they swapped them around. Made huge amounts of money. Google made web search easy compared to AOL. AOL disappeared and Google took over the market. iPhones made high-tech computers accessible and usable in a way you didn't ever have before. Sky made hardware and software accessible and ended up selling 10 million boxes in the UK. And Amazon created frustration-free packaging 15-20 years ago and now dominate the online shopping market. I think we have huge economic evidence that if you do this well, you will get a return on investment. And I think what's amazing is not, that there are still companies who don't get it.
Yeah. Good points. And I wondered too, and maybe David could start, but anyone else feel free to jump in on this question about, in terms of that's if we can communicate better that economic evidence to industry, that will help us a lot with getting the better design products and services and environments out there. But in terms of expressing this message to the public audience, so that we as consumers might be sort of more equipped with what to call for, like what better design to call for, what to look for, or just to know what our options are out there. I guess, how do you, in the benefits that might come with that, how do you think we can communicate to individuals or more largely to society the benefits of spending on things that could be good for our health?
Well, I think I'll answer a bit of that. There's lots of different aspects to that question. There's a policy aspect about, why is the Equality Act not applied universally? Why is it selective about what it decides to be equal about? But if you move away from the policy aspect and into sort of a market solution, as consumers, we have very little choice in reality. The only choice we've got is to vote with our wallets. If Sainsbury's is awful, then go somewhere else. If it's not awful, then go there. If a shop, looks after you better than another shop, vote with your wallet. It's the same with social media. People complain about it all the time about being evil in photographs and all the rest of it. Well, then don't use it, But if you keep supporting things that don't work, then they will keep doing things that don't work. And I think that supply and demand thing, we've really got to be more focused on, all of us. And of course, then we've got to talk about, the ageism thing, that word that it's very loaded and difficult. But, and I, as a designer, was guilty of this, and I'm sure all designers at some point were guilty of this. You kind of designed in your own image. The client just said, design us a shop, so we designed a shop. And you didn't think, you didn't have the brief, you didn't have the budget, you didn't have the knowledge to design beyond that. And it probably wasn't forgivable in the 80s and 90s, but it's certainly not forgivable today. Just to design where you exclude a percentage of the population through ignorance, and particularly when that percentage of the population has, the vast majority of the household spending capability in the country.
Yeah, 100%.
And perhaps just come back on the choice thing, because I think it's very, very relevant in terms of all of us. And there is a bit of a chicken and egg situation where you'll have suppliers saying, well, older people don't change what products, so we won't market to them. And then people say, well, if you don't market to them, then people won't change their products. But I think there is something about, we probably all need less choice, but we need better choice. And actually, we don't need 30,000 financial service products. We need to know. And Marks and Spencer's, to be fair, have been great at this with their Plan A. If you go into Marks and Spencer's, the idea is that if you buy eggs, they're always free range. If you buy clothes, they're always washable at 40 degrees. We need exactly the same in other sectors, where instead of having thousands and thousands of products that we don't understand, we have a small number and we can trust them. Car insurance, travel insurance is one of the best examples here, where you have these comparison websites which are completely impossible for anyone to understand, because they all include different things. And actually what you really want as a consumer is, here is product A, you can trust this will get you back, give you health cover, and look after your bags if you don't do it. And I think we're actually making the world more complicated, not less, as a way of distinguishing products between each other. And that is to the disadvantage of all of us, because none of us, frankly, really wants to go through 400 pages of travel cover.
And this is again talking out of school a little bit from a previous job I had, but I used to be head of design at Homebase, and obviously our number one customer was B&Q. B&Q had all the purchasing power, were much bigger than Homebase, and they went on an everyday low price campaign. No messing about, no mucking, no 10% Fridays, no buy one get one, just everyday low price. But we couldn't compete on that. So it was all smoke and mirrors. It's all 10% Fridays, and when it's gone, and that sort of impulse purchase, until the consumer was so confused they didn't know what they were buying, quite frankly. And all those impulse purchases would therefore fly off the shelves, not realizing they were paying high margins. And it's a bit nasty, but that was it. It's the difference. And I'm absolutely with David that, we've got to look at that and just go for good products and services. And once we've worked out who they are, we should support them, and we should not support people who are not offering good products and services. But it's not easy. Marketeers and advertising agencies and clients have had decades worth of understanding how to tap in to the human psyche to sell us things.
It's definitely that glut of options. When you were talking about the shoemaker, come to my shoe stall or whatever, now if you look for shoes, where do you begin? You know, it's that drinking from a fire hydrant or whatever, you know, it's just like so much. So I think clarity and communication around, you know, what is good, inclusive, age friendly. I don't know if that's accreditation or it's some kind of carrot or stick, you know. I mean, I think speak with your wallet, absolutely, but it's kind of easier said than done when you know all the people you're chatting about, call them, you know, the marketers and you know, these different strategies around showing you stuff that you maybe don't need, but being convinced that you do. So it's like, I think we need that sort of that beacon or that trust, you know, that seems a difficult nut to crack, but that seems important here to have confidence that you're being shown what is the best, you know, what is good design, what is it accessible, will it give me pleasure, is the experience as good as it should be, and trying to get past that noise, that's the difficulty.
And that's assuming you have choice. You know, if you live in a rural area and you have one supermarket, that's your choice. You know, you've got one supermarket. So sometimes it's just not possible. And then we've all got to do that very un-British thing and complain. You know, if something's not right, you need to say something about it. It is, and it's difficult. You know, we're not very good at it, apparently, in this country, although there's different research says different things on that. But yeah, you do have to make your views heard. But yeah.
I think on that point, to you, Chris, about that rewarding or you know, helping us highlight what good design looks like, it goes to Vivi's point in the report about that we can reward accessibility and sort of help signpost to where it is, where it has been done well. And Vivi, that sort of draws me to ask you if there are other key messages, like for you personally, that stood out to you in the report that you hope come across.
That's a really good question. I think the key thing, and perhaps unsurprisingly, when we're looking at these barriers, they are complicated, they are often interconnected. And I think when we think about how we're going to address them, we need to do this successfully. I think we need to get people from different backgrounds, from different fields working together. And also making sure that we're listening to individuals. So I hate the expression evidence-based policy and evidence-based, not because I disagree with it, but because I feel that that's what we should be doing all the time. We shouldn't need to say evidence-based. That's yeah, and I think otherwise we do run the risk of sort of either designing projects or devising policies that aren't addressing, you know, they're addressing a perceived problem or challenge rather than a real problem or challenge. Yeah. 100%.
Perhaps just to come back on that, because I think a really good point. Now, clearly government and you know, think tanks occasionally and others sort of do the opposite, sort of instead of evidence-based policy, it's policies-based evidence. So we basically, or it's the other way around, that we basically look for the evidence that supports our policy rather than the other way around. I think one thing we need to be really cautious of in the whole discussion around the listening to people is that lots of people in marketing industry say, why the hell would we listen to our customers? And they're sort of right in that, you know, and I always come back to that Ford quote of, you know, if you ask me about sort of what you know, in terms of the future of mobility, people would have asked for a faster horse rather than a car. And I think there is something around designers have a responsibility, but that doesn't mean you always have to listen to exactly what people are saying. And what we know is that people will say what they think based on their current knowledge and experience, and design has to change our lives. You've got such an important job here and such an exciting job here. The reality is our world and our products and our services are changing. We just need to make sure that we take people along with us. If you go to places like Israel, you know, come back to where I started, you know, the whole car parking app, they have a single car parking app that works across the whole of the country. You press the button and turn it on and drive wherever you want. You don't have to worry about it. People have been taken along a journey, and there would be no sense of this is crazy, this is impossible to use. So I think there's just something about us, you know, yes, I shouldn't be too negative about this. Yes, listen, but actually we have to lead as well.
I agree. I guess there is definitely a point where the designer or the policymaker, whoever it may be, has to make decisions based on, you know, their insights or maybe their access to new technology, things that might not be out there. But I think they have to be as well informed as possible, which is why I think they have to listen. Like Ford equally said, you can have any color you want as long as it's black, you know, so there's that power sometimes can be misused. So I think if people understand, and if people are on the same page, have the same agenda around age friendliness, then yes, absolutely, at some point they have to make that decision. But yeah, it's a position of privilege or power or influence, and it has to be used the right way, and ideally by thinking about the kind of diversity of need out there, and older people not being a homogenous group, no stereotypes, you know. So that's why I think listening is so important.
I agree. I think this might be a good moment to bring in some of the audience questions that are coming through. And the first one that I'm seeing here on the list, it goes back to a point you made, Colin, earlier about whether we have choice, and your sort of reference in maybe if we're living more remotely, we might only have one grocery store. So this question is, what do the panel see as the key challenges in relation to removing barriers for the rural, for older people who live in rural areas, over and above the question of the public transport provision?
Yeah, I think that came from Keith Binding. Hi, Keith. Thanks for that. I mean, there's lots of challenge rurally. I mean, transport is one, and the diminishing services in the high street. You know, particularly if you used to on your high street having one bank, one post office, one groceries, one whatever. They're all kind of disappearing, and that means that you have to travel to get the things you want, or you have to go online. Neither of which are good experience on the whole as yet in those areas. And I think that comes from a policy and investment perspective. Either that, or we redesign transport, which is something we're looking at the minute at the Design Age Institute. You know, we've got innovation projects in the transport space and the mobility space currently, but those are the ones that are very, very big questions that involve not just design, but the whole of government and the whole of society.
And perhaps let me call it my sort of I suppose that I think design can make rural living much more accessible, and it can make villages better. It can, there is a very, very significant role, and of course one of the challenges you have is many rural areas haven't changed for 100 years, and that is the joy of them. But that is also what contributes to being not very accessible. In the same way that places like London has, a lot of the buildings we have are the same buildings we had 300 years ago. So it's very hard to make them accessible. So we have to be conscious of that, particularly in the UK. I think one thing, living in rural areas is an amazing thing, and this is where I'm going to get into trouble. I do think, though, we need to be honest with all of us around, for example, the reality is that there are fewer services in rural areas. And actually, if you are particularly if you're physically moving yourself from an urban to a rural area, at the point at which you need services, I think there is a real issue that actually we're not honest to older people and say, are you really sure you want to do this? Because actually, and it will work for some people, but we know that people move away from their communities, they move into places where there just aren't the services. And I think design can partly answer that problem, but not completely. And I think we just need to be a bit more honest with people about the benefits, yes, but actually the challenges of rural living, because there are undoubtedly huge ones that design is not going to solve.
And I think some of the challenges, the provision of groceries and all those things, they can be solved and are being solved digitally. They're not 100% great at the minute, but, compared to where they were 10 years ago, if you think 5 or 10 years into the future, if there's the same sort of leap in service development, then they're going to be great. What seems, but the loss of all those sort of post offices and banks and things results in a lack of opportunity to interact socially. And somewhere that's the thing that design can do. How do you reimagine rural locations that they are opportunities for people to meet and talk and chat and get to know each other, share and support each other? Because the one thing that an app can't do, it cannot bring you a cup of sugar or give you a hug. And those things, as we've all learned 3 years ago, are hugely important. So how can design and what is design's role in helping to reimagine those and create those connections in a community? A lot of the rest can come to us digitally.
I think like as well, coming from a rural area, and my family, you know, going back to grandparents coming from an even more rural area, I definitely see the challenges. So I think, David, that honesty, and you know, the sort of notion of communicating what the experience will be like, the highs and the lows, it's idyllic sounding to move lockside and be sat in front of a fire reading a book. But then if you have a, you know, catastrophic fall and, you know, split your hip into, and there's no hospitals in the area anymore, and even the local clinics have long gone, you know, due to lack of resource, lack of money, that's a massive challenge that, yeah, the rural, it's the trade-off, that rural setting, that's part of the character of it now. But equally, Colin, you know, I think that there's loads that can be done, and there is a lot that digital can cover. But yeah, I think the honesty is an interesting point, David. I think that's really important. We've seen it in our research time and time again, people moving to rural areas without fully understanding, you know, as time goes on, how their experience will change.
I do think also we have to think at the full life course. You know, I've got to the age now where you're thinking about, you know, what does retirement look like? What are you going to do? And this idea that, right, I've hit 60 or 65, I'm retiring and I'm going to either stay in the house I'm in or buy my, you know, rose-covered thatched cottage in the middle of the countryside. You know, in my head, that isn't a wise thing. That's not the way you think about it. You think about, right, I'm soon I'll be 60. I'm going to spend 10 years doing this, then 10 years doing that. Then by that stage, by the time I hit 75, I'd better be back in a city, near a hospital, near my GP, near my family, near my children. You know. So it's not this idea that you retire and that's it for the rest of your life. I think, you know, because your needs change. Why would you not change where you live based on the needs that you have at that time? And at the age of 60, 65, yes, I want to just get out of London and have a cottage or, you know, on a mountain somewhere or on a beach somewhere. But once I get to 70, 75, nope. Then suddenly it's social interaction and back in where there are services and facilities. I just want to say one thing. Oliver Chan has been very active on the Q&A, and I just want to, I don't think all of you asked a question as such, but you did want to sort of signpost this to things like the Chatty Calf Scheme, Camarados, Birthday Project, and Happy to Talk benches, which I think, well, I'll certainly check out. So thanks for posting us to them. So thanks.
Thanks, and thanks for everyone to the questions that have been coming through. I think we might have time for one more here, and then we can follow up when we make a post about this. We can touch on some of the questions we weren't able to respond to in person today. But Cameron Waldron asks, he says there appears to be a common issue of agency of the older population, and the question is, perhaps design should also focus on how to improve the power and agency of individuals. Are we ignoring the self-efficacy resources of individuals?
Yeah, well, this taps into something, you know, that Carly, you and I, we talk about quite a lot, and Chris here, this idea of wisdom, this idea that, you know, that sort of graph that talks about ability as one ages, you know, is kind of well known. But, you know, in the same way that, you know, I've one of everything I need, but was also true as I've bought it 10 times already. You know, so I've learned how to buy trousers and forks and chairs and whatever. And that wisdom, that canny consumerism, you know, that agency, that learning how to do something, that increasing wisdom as you age, I think is something that's not talked about a lot. And how a designer can respond to somebody who has, if you're trying to sell me a pair of jeans, well, remember, I have bought 30 pairs of jeans in my life. You know, if you tell me that skinny jeans are going to make me more sexy at 56, I'm going to tell you you're confused. So how do you tap into that lifetime worth of experiences and that agency that comes with that? How do you leverage that? I think could be really powerful.
And I think the other thing around sort of agency is recognizing that our own perceptions of aging aren't necessarily the perceptions of everyone, and also letting people make mistakes. You know, one of the really interesting things that we did a piece of work on dementia and spending recently, and one of our core sort of principles was we're not here to stop people with dementia buying stuff, and frankly we all buy stupid things, and that actually we should not be in a place where we're trying to overprotect people and you let them make mistakes. And one of the really fascinating things that came out from that was people with dementia we spoke to, and indeed businesses, said that, you know what, paying using cards, using prepaid cards or debit cards is so much better than cash for people with dementia. Because basically they don't have to worry about change, they don't have to worry about, and yet actually there is often a we know better for people. And I think we've got to recognize that actually there could be some really, really interesting design-led solutions to some of these problems. But actually, let me be a bit softer on my don't listen to people, let's let people make mistakes. Let's let people actually consume to enhance well-being. And then my final point was just this, why I think this is really important, why we care about it, is because and there is a bit of ageism in talking about, different generations wanting and needing different things, but actually our needs and wants at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy don't change. We all have a need for food and shelter. We might just want it to look a little bit different. At the top, we all have the same needs. We have the same need for self-actualization. In between those, we might want to spend a bit less on clothes and work travel when we stop working, and a bit more on holidays and leisure. But actually, we all want to have fun. We all want social connections. Age is pretty irrelevant to that. And I think the challenge and opportunity for the design community is how you deliver that rather complex but conflicting opportunity.
I think that's a perfect note to end on there, David. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us today, and a big thank you to the audience for listening in and for sharing your questions that we'll follow up on. And please check out the report on our websites, and we'll have further exploration on this topic going forward as well. So look forward to hopefully seeing you again. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.